How do you go about studying poker? Like, let's say you have found that, well, I don't know, is there a spot that you've been working on recently?
Recently, it's just been really solidifying the fundamentals. I've been playing online a lot, which the best thing about online is it makes it really, really easy to work on your game because there's hand histories. And I've been just every morning waking up and I go through tournament hand histories from the day before. And I'm kind of going through them quickly just to see if there's anything glaring that I did. And when interesting hands come up, there's a lot of, software out there. There's a lot of information that you can use to analyze hands. So, I mean, I'm not focusing too much on these close spots where it's like, I can call here, I can easily justify calling, easily justify folding. Those are not the spots that you should be like dwelling on a lot when you're working on your game. Working on your game should be a lot of solidifying like the solid, make sure you don't have any strong leaks in your game. So lately I've been working, really solidifying pre-flop stuff, but I've been working a lot on like CVETs, continuation betting, and board textures on continuation betting and different sizings. So I think flop play is, in a majority of a tournament, a lot of hands are ending on like the flop or pre-flop later on. And so really solidifying your flop strategies, I think, is very important in tournaments.
So what do you do to solidify that? Like, what are you thinking about away from the table to try to do it? Because a lot of people, you say study poker and they just don't even know what that means. So what does study poker mean to you?
There's a lot of programs I use. I use a program called Poker Cruncher a lot on my Mac. It's a great program where basically you can put in like 2 hand ranges and then you can put in a flop and it will tell you, well, this hand range is stronger on this flop. And so I'll play around with some hand ranges, play around with like, I'll use these set ranges that I have for like under the gun, cutoff, middle position. I have them saved in there. And playing around with different ranges and different flop textures and how they coordinate with those flops. So you can run those on like, say, an ace-5 deuce rainbow board, which is a very dry board. And then you can run them on, say like a 10-7-5 two-tone board or an 8-7-6 two-tone board. And knowing how different ranges connect with different flops is so important into developing your strategies later on in the hands. And just knowing, people tend to focus on like one hand. Like my favorite joke of poker is like, well, they put you on ace king and then they acted accordingly. Like people love to put you on one specific hand. Normally it's a hand that they can beat, and then they play accordingly with their hand. Like what are they supposed to do against that one hand that they can beat? And changing that mindset, you should be thinking about the entire range of people's hands that they can have. What are they doing with this part of this hand in their range? What are they doing with this hand in their range? And knowing how the entirety of their range just kind of coordinates with different flops is very, very important. And different turn cards too, where it changes the boards a lot.
Okay, so imagine you are playing in a tournament where a lot of people limp. That's just what they do. So imagine this is probably a smaller stakes tournament where everyone's just limping, trying to see the flop. What is your default strategy? We'll talk a little bit about this in the next webinar, but what is your default strategy there? Are you limping a lot of stuff also, or are you raising a ton? How are you approaching that?
I don't do a lot of open limping, but I do a lot more limping behind than a lot of players do. If people are limping like into pots, and people are allowing you to see flops for cheap, I start limping behind with a lot of hands. Again, you want to be doing it with a lot of the hands that we talk about that play very, very well multi-way, but I'll start limping behind with hands like, a lot of like my suited kings or weak suited queens where I can make big flushes, or sometimes even if I'm on like, a lot of my limping will be from late position and stuff. I'll start limping some of my like offsuit, like connected cards, like maybe like my 9-10 offsuits or 9-8 offsuits where I can flop some open and do straight draws against players. I do a lot more of, you should be doing a lot more of your limping behind from, late position, because there's less players that can raise behind you versus like if on limps, you should be doing less limping from under the gun 1 because it's way less likely that it's actually going to get limped around. There's a greater chance that someone's going to have a hand to raise versus if, a player has limped and you're in the cutoff, I think it's way more justified to limp there because there's only 3 players left behind that can raise.
Okay. I mean, I'm also a pretty big fan of limping behind with a decent amount of stuff. Are you limping behind with a lot of total garbage or just reasonable hands? Like, say 5 people limp and you have Jack 3 suited on the button. Are you calling there, or are we just folding that?
If it's very weak players, I will limp behind sometimes with the Jack 3 suited. Granted that we're very deep stacked. Like, I won't do it at like 100 big blinds deep, but like maybe like 150 or 200 big blinds deep, like in level 1 of the tournament. I'll do it. But again, they have to be very weak players, because if you're doing that against like some good players who are capable of folding like smaller flushes, it's gonna become that becomes a lot more of a problem for you.
All right, let's see if I can find. I saw another question, but then I lost it in the chat box. Someone asked what drugs I must be on to deal with all the people in the chat box. It's a good question. All right, so someone saying lately in their live $1,000 buy-in tournaments, Mega Donor says this. He's noticed that he or she has noticed people have been donk betting a lot. Have we noticed this, or have you noticed this strategy at all?
Dontk betting is actually something that I've incorporated more into my strategy, and I think we have some hand examples in the advanced webinar that we'll be going over. But I think there's a lot of board textures where it makes sense to be leading into the pre-flop razor, and there's a lot of good spots as bluffs and with made hands that you should be doing it on. The boards that I'm doing it on, a lot more are going to be like the boards like earlier when we had the set of sixes on the 10-7-6 with 2 clubs board. I'm a lot more likely to lead that board from the big blind into the razors than I am, say, like ace-9 deuce rainbow, just because the 10-7-6 gets checked around a lot by, like, they're going to check behind a lot of their, like, jack 10s and queen 10s, and being able to bet the flop and bet turn, bet river is where you can start to put a lot more pressure on those hands. And so I've started being more balanced, and I'll lead with a lot of big hands on those super wet boards, as well as leading with a lot of my draws, especially in like multi-way pots. I think it's something that people just kind of auto check to the razor, and I don't think it's correct to just auto check to the razor. I think there's a lot of instances where it makes a lot of sense to lead, and people don't do it enough.